As a professional bike technician, one of the most common problems people come to me with is poor gear shifting. I'm going to take an educated guess that at some point your gear's been shifting properly in one direction but is sluggish in the other. Sooner or later you're going to want to sort that problem out so you've got super slick shifting and your bike's safe to ride. Often it's the gear cables causing the problems, and there's a lot of fluff on YouTube and on the internet about how to sort it out. I'm going to cut straight through that and show you how to fit a gear cable to your bike the right way. You've just got to become the bike. This will give you thousands of miles of slick shifting without having to worry about the gear cables for a long time. There's just so many tips in this video, it's making my head spin. But you want to stick around to the end because I'm going to show you a trick and a tip that will save you money, time and frustration. And it's so often looked over by professional and amateur mechanics. They don't even know they're doing it wrong. So buckle your toe straps, we're going to get straight into it right now. There are a host of reasons why you might need to change or want to change your gear cables. They might be too long because they come from the factory like that. They just have standard lengths on lots of different sizes of bikes. They might be too short because you've changed your handlebar stem or something like that. Or they just might not be shifting properly. I'm changing mine because I slammed my handlebar stem down and now they're too long, but they're also a little bit sticky. So I'm just going to go ahead and change them because they haven't been changed for a very long time. So the tools you're going to need to do this job successfully are a set of cable cutters, a really good quality set. You won't be able to cut the cables very well if you just try and use pliers or side cutters. You really do need a set of bicycle cable cutters. Set of long nose pliers to pull the cable with because your hands just aren't strong enough to do it. A bradawl or an awl, or just something with a nice spike on it like this has, so you can poke the insides of the outer casings out. And at least one 5mm Allen key, or maybe a Torx key or a 4mm Allen key, depending on what derailleurs you're working on. So I'm going to be doing this on a Shimano STI system where the cables come out of the side of the levers. But as we go through, I'll talk about the other types there are and what you might need to do that's different to what I'm actually doing today. As with most gear-related jobs, we're just going to put it into the two smallest cogs. Smallest one at the front, smallest one at the rear. So the first thing we're going to do is get our cable cutters and our Allen key, and we're just going to snip the end cap off the rear gear cable, and then we're going to undo the pinch bolt. Don't just try pulling the end cap off because it's going to be damaged underneath where it's been crimped and it'll just come out all frayed, and you can't reuse the end caps anyway. So let's pull the outer cable out of the barrel adjuster and taking with it the inner cable out of the derailleur itself. And then you want to just pull the outer cable off the inner cable and then put that to the side because we're going to use that to measure up for the next bit of outer that we're going to replace it with. You may have to cut the crimped part of the inner cable where it was underneath the pinch bolt off, just so that you can get that bit of outer off, and also so you can pull it through the cable guides. So then when you want to grab the bit of outer at the front where it goes into an adjuster or into a cable stop, and just drag that out, and with it drag the inner cable from the back of the bike all the way through to the front. And once we've done that, what I usually do is I screw the adjusters in on both the rear derailleur, and if there's one in line, I screw that all the way in, or like on the frame, the same thing. And then I just back them off for a couple of turns. So we've got something to play with either way when we come to fit the new cable. The next thing I do is I grab my cutters and I work out where I want the outer casing to be cut so it's the right length for the bike. Because I want the new cables to be shorter, I'm just going to cut a little bit off the end, but I'm just going to mark it as I do that before I actually take it right off the bike. I'll be using this as a guide to work out what length the new cable has to be. The next thing to do is to take the outer cable off the inner cable. I just cut it or put it to the side and just cut it later when I'm ready to measure up the new one. And then you want to get the inner cable out of the shifter. Now with mine, where it's got the external cables that come out of the side of the shifters, what I do is I just get a toe strap and I strap the lever to the bar because that gives me access to get the cables in and out without needing more hands. Now on some other ones like Campagnolo ones and SRAM and some of the more modern Shimano ones, you actually need to roll the hood back on the lever so that you can get the cable in and out. Okay, now we've got access to where the cable comes out of. We just want to push it out so it comes out of the lever. Now it should come out easily because we shifted down into the smaller sprocket at the rear. So it should be in line with the hole that gives us access to put the cable in and out of. Now we're going to get our cutters and cut the cable that we marked where the mark was. So now we've got the length for our template, and we're going to get our new outer housing. And we're going to do that by holding the two ends together and then just running along until that gets to the point where the end is, and we're just going to cut it there. Now I always cut it a little bit longer because what happens sometimes is when you cut through the index cables, the liner that's inside them just kind of gets crimped on the end and you can't ever really get it poked out. So you might have to just snip a tiny bit off to sort that problem out. While I'm at it, I'm going to cut myself another piece for the rear derailleur. I'm just going to take it straight off this one that I took off the bike because I know that's the right length. If it was too long or too short, or you're just doing this as the first job on this bike, you'll have to work that out yourself by just holding a piece of cable up to the derailleur and working out what the length is. It's always nice to have a good loop in it. So I'm just going to check this bit of outer casing on the rear. Just make sure there's a nice arc that goes round from the cable stop into the barrel adjuster. You don't want it to be too tight because otherwise it'll just snag the cable up. And again, you don't want it to be too long because it's causing more unnecessary friction. Now you want to get your cable cutters, and right by the pivot there's two little gaps there to reshape the end of the outer casing where you cut it, because it might be a bit squashed or something, and just make it round again, and then the caps will fit on much better. And then you want to get your awl or your bradawl and poke inside the outer cable so that it pushes the inner liner that the cable runs through out, and so it's nice and round and clear and it doesn't snag on it, causing more friction. And then you want to get your casing caps for the outer and fit them to the cables. I like to get the outer casing caps on before I start fitting the cables to the bike. That way it's all ready to go and you're not in a position where you might forget to put it on and then you've got to take the cable back out to get it all right. From these metal ones I like to use the ones with the bigger hole in the end. It just means they're less likely to drag on the cables. That's so it makes the shifting better and there isn't as much friction. You know, not all the innovations in cycling components are better. One of those is the sealed caps, the little metal ones with the rubber seals in them, and also the ones with the liner off the end of them. Generally, I just find that they make the cables snag more and therefore create more friction, and so the shifting is just not going to be as slick. Then what I do, whether it's their plastic caps or their metal caps, is I get a little bit of grease on the end of them and just smear it around, and that way they won't get seized into the adjuster barrels or into the cable stops on the frame, because if it does that, you might have to drill them out at some point and you might actually end up with a frame that's written off. Then you want to get your new inner cable and start to feed it through the shifter, making sure that you don't let it touch the ground at all because it will pick up dirt. What I do is I drag it nearly all the way in, so I've maybe left 2 or 3 centimeters, maybe even more out. And then I get a little bit of grease and I basically grease the end of the cable, just a bit that's sticking out, because that's going to be inside the shifter and you won't be able to grease it afterwards. And I make sure I get grease on the nipple as well, because that's where cables are most likely to break, and especially if they can just move around a little bit, stopping that happening in the future. As you're going to fit the inner cable, you might want to just check that you can see light through the shifter where the cable's meant to come out and it hasn't got like knocked or something from when you shift it into the smaller sprocket. Occasionally you need to like wiggle the lever a little bit just so you can get that through. The next thing you want to do is pull the end of the cable into the shifter from the other side of the shifter and just make sure it locates properly into where it goes in the lever. What I like to do then, just to make sure everything's all right and it's located properly, is just hold the inner cable on the outboard side of the shifter and just shift up a couple of gears and shift back just to make sure that it's working properly before I go any further. And then you want to get yourself some more grease on your fingers and just grease the whole inner cable. Now I run it in backwards and forwards so that it's definitely got loads of grease in it. And this will aid the shifting and it'll also make the cables last a lot longer. So it's all super slick for a very long time. The next thing you want to do is just get the inner and just put it somewhere safe, the end of it. So like you could just hook it up into the rear derailleur, into the adjuster. Basically what you're doing is just putting it somewhere while you sort out your outers and it doesn't fall on the floor and just get dirt stuck to it, because that will just get into the shifting cables and kind of defeats the object of changing the cables in the first place. Now grab the bit of outer that you're going to use from the shifter to the stop on the front of the bike, slide the inner cable through it and then pull it all the way through and locate the outer cable into the shifter. Make sure it's nice and snug, and then get your inner cable and work your way around the obstacles that there may be to the adjuster or the stop on the frame, like the front brake cable. You want to run that on the inside of it next to the head tube rather than the outside, because you don't want to be taking it back off or having to take the front brake off, so you can get that right and it's not snagging when you're out there riding. As you pull the inner cable through the adjuster or the cable stop, you want to just locate the outer, the other end of the outer, into the adjuster and make sure that it's seated properly. And then you need to go underneath the bike and run it through the cable guides. And what I've done here is I've cleaned this up a little bit because there's a load of gack underneath my bottom bracket and I don't want that dirt getting into the outer cable at the back of the bike. I've also got a little bit of inner liner here just to keep it nice and clean when the bike's being used out on the road. Now rescue your inner cable from wherever you've had it tucked away, and you want to feed it through the outer housing. Get the outer housing into the stop on the frame and then push the inner cable through the barrel adjuster, seat the outer cable into the barrel adjuster, and then you want to put it underneath the washer on the pinch bolt. So you want to get your long nose pliers and pull the cable quite tight while it's underneath the pinch bolt and the washer, and then just nip the Allen key up. You can't do this with your hands because you can't really put it tight enough to make sure everything's seated in as far as the outer casings go. Then you want to cut most of the excess off the inner cable, because if you start shifting it with a big bit of inner cable flapping about, the chances are it'll go into the back wheel or into the chain. You don't have to cut it to the length that you want in the end, you just have to nip it off so it's out of the way. And now it's time to set the gears up. I'm just going to set these up quickly here. If you want to see how to index gears, I've got a video on that and I'll just put that down in the description. Now the gears are all set up, you want to do a final bolt check on the rear derailleur, get your Allen key or your Torx key, whatever it was, and just make sure that the pinch bolt is tight enough to secure the cable permanently. And then you get your cutters and cut off any excess of the inner cable that there is. And finally get your inner cable casing cap, and you can do this with the inside of the cutters. There's a little hole there and you can just crimp the actual end cap onto the inner cable. I use a set of pliers and just put like a few little crimp places in it. I just find that secures it better, but also I know that I was the one that fitted that cable. So if you're finding this video interesting and useful, just take a second now to smash the like button down the bottom, maybe share it with someone who you think would benefit from it, and leave some comments if you want to. I'd quite like to see in the comments what sort of things and what parts of this you found really useful. So when it comes to gear cables, I only use the best quality cables. So the ones I use are Shimano stainless steel inner cables, and I use the SP51 6mm outer. And the reason I do that is because stainless steel cables don't rust, but also the outer cable has a wider internal diameter. So the cables run through there much slicker, but also because they're bigger, they are much stiffer and don't flex as much or compress as much when you're shifting the gears. So the gears are much slicker in shifting. The other thing is they come with metal ferrules to go on the end, the casing caps, and these don't get distressed when they're being used for a while, or from the handlebars turning. They don't end up splitting like the plastic ones, so they do last a lot longer. So basically you've got slicker shifting and a much better longevity from your gear cables than you would do if you use thinner cables. Now the only time I vary from this is if you've got a frame or a shifter or something like that that won't take that size barrel, and so you have to use the smaller ones. Something else I try to avoid, which you might think is an innovation, is cable ends that have got like seals on them, or they've got like long tangs on them, or those gaiters, and all these things just create friction and basically make the gears not work as well as they otherwise would do. So I try and avoid those if you can, because they're not going to benefit you in any way. So if you've made it this far through the video, thanks a lot, and here's your top tip. This will save you time, it'll save you money, and it'll save you frustration. Now most people will cut their inner cables way too short. They cut them really close to the pinch bolts, and the problem with doing that is that when you cut the end cap off to do a service, or you pull it off and it frays out when you do a service, it's not very long, and sometimes it's actually like the next time from having a new cable in that you have to replace the cable because it won't reach to the pinch bolt the next time. This is definitely one of my pet hates of other mechanics. The reason I find cables being cut too short and too close to the pinch bolt so frustrating is because it shows no foresight or consideration for the future. This is especially true with internal gear routing, because it can be a much longer and a much more challenging job than trying to rectify this with outboard cables. As a professional bike mechanic, I want to do the job fast, correct, and cost effectively. Cutting the cables too short and not being able to refit the same cable puts a kibosh on that. So when you've had a new cable fitted, or you've fitted a new cable yourself, one thing you've got to be prepared for is at some point down the line, and it probably won't be too long, like a couple of 100 miles or something like that, you'll have to readjust the gears because the outers will seat themselves in and the inners do stretch. So you'll end up with the gears that don't quite lift as well as they should do, but it should only take a little tweak to sort that out. Now if you're replacing a gear cable on a bike that's got the gear cable underneath the handlebar tape, if you take the outers to the handlebars before you set the gears up and let it all bed into the shifters, you'll end up finding that later on the gears really don't work that well, and the only way to actually solve it is to take your handlebar tape off, undo the tape, and then redo the job. And you could have just done that the first time and then left it alone and done some more bike riding rather than having to sort your gear cables out again and probably having to replace your handlebar tape.